So the Gemara's impulse was that this idea of Bishul Akum is actually found in the Torah, which we discussed yesterday at length. There's a machlekes rishonim, which gezerah preceded which one. Was the first one Bishul Akum, because that's more reason to asa than bread. Bread is a staple food and you need it, so therefore they were much more lenient. In fact, in halachas, there are a lot of leniencies we find by bread. We don't find by Bishul Akum. Or others say the other way around. In the order of the Mishnah, Pas Akum is mentioned first before Bishul Akum, which means the Pas Akum, because it's a staple food, therefore they decided to ban it first, and Bishul Akum only came in later. But now the Gemara is going to tell us some of the leniencies when it comes to Bishul Akum with the criteria. So at the very top of the page, the top line. Amar Amarav, Kol Hanechel Kemois Shehu Chai, anything that can be eaten raw. There is no problem with Bishul Akum. Now, just quickly understand, what exactly is the basis for the Easter of Bishul Akum? What are we worried about? The very top Rashi on the page says that the basis for the Easter of Bishul Akum is we're scared the person might put treif into your house, into your food. According to Taisus and Moses Shainim and Rashi elsewhere, they say the problem is chasnus. We don't want you to socialize too much or to interact too much. And there's and they're nafkaminas halacha, as you can see different machlekes and how to explain that. There's another very interesting machlekes in the Rishonim. When we say that there's a problem of Bishul Akum, is it only talking about if the goy brings you food from their house or from a store? What about if you have a goyish maid working in your house and they cook in your house? Is there really an issue? According to the Ravid, in your house is no issue. He says none of the reasons apply. Others say if the main reason is because tray for food in your house, where are they going to get access to tray for food? But if the problem is socializing, they say, well, there's no difference in your house or another house. In fact, in your house, maybe it's even worse because they're there. You watch them working and how much effort they put in for you. It brings people together. And other Rishonim say it makes absolutely no difference where they're cooking. In your house or another house, this law is universal. It's usher in all cases. Okay, now, so one opinion says... Sorry?
What's
halacha ma'aseh is usher in all cases.
So if a non-Jew cooks in a Jewish house,
you got to light the fire,
and you don't light the fire, everything's for treifin.
Now that itself is a machlekes if the pots are treif. The food you cannot eat. There's a machlekes regarding the pot. The Rashba holds that the pot needs a hechsher, needs kashering. Other Rishonim hold that the pot does not need kashering, and generally say we try to be machmir to kasher. If you cook b'di'evid, we say, well, there was a rave against it, and the shach says over there that rave against it, so we're lenient. But we definitely kasher. So Bishul Akum is a serious thing.
So if you cook b'di'evid, you just said, so wait a second, if someone starts a pot of food and it's cooking and the goyim are in your house.
So what's the problem? Turn the fire off, turn it on, make the fire bigger.
But if I presume if it's more than machal ben drusai,
we're going to talk about that in a minute. Actually, you're jumping ahead, but there are some Rishonim who are very machmir like you, and they say that if the goy already cooked more than a third way, more than machal ben drusai, it doesn't matter what he does afterwards; it's too late. Most Rishonim are mekel. We're lenient and say the E does anything to add, as we'll see in the Gemara soon. Okay, let's go on. Let's move on. Yeah, we'll come back to what you said. Then we're going to continue. That's one criteria. The other criteria is, okay, you need raw. Anybody should be because the guy didn't really benefit anything. Number one, but the surah mas nahachi in surah they learned this way. That's how they learned in the surah. But this mas nahachi, this learned a little differently. They said the criteria is kol she'ein nechel al shulchan malachim. If it's not chashuv food. The lafes boy esapas, to eat it together with bread or to dip your bread into it. In other words, you wouldn't have it, you wouldn't invite guests. It's not a chush of food. Then aim boy mishum bishul akum. You know, the homachlek is, for example, regarding potato chips. Do we look at this the species of food, or we look at the way you prepare the food? You know, potatoes themselves can be very double chashuv, but potato chips is a snack. It's not really a food. So, is there a problem of Bishul Akum? Shimon Cowan tells me that when his father, Sir Zalman Cohen, was the Governor General of Australia, Prince Charles came to visit, and what they served was Coke and potato chips. So now we know for sure that potato chips, at least Australian potato chips, are oila shulchan malachim. Especially now he's the king. Okay. Says the Gemara further. My benayu, what is the difference between these two explanations? Whether it's where you can eat it raw, then there's no bishul akum, or whether it's oila shul malachim. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you three differences. Ika benayu dogim ktanim, small little fish that is not chashiv, it's not oila shul malachim, but it cannot be eaten raw. So that's one. Number two is, so the fact that it cannot be eaten raw means you have to cook it. So according to the first answer, that is bishul akum, according to the first criteria. But according to the second criteria, since it's not something chashiv, I guess in those days they didn't have little sardines, whatever. It's not something chashiv, therefore it's not bishul akum, according to the second opinion. Number two is ardi mushrooms. Again, in those days they wouldn't eat it raw, and but it's not oishul malachim. Today, probably just the opposite. And the third thing is vedaisa, like a hot porridge. Again, you couldn't eat it properly raw, but it is not. So the Rishonim want to know why all three examples are basically satisfying one criteria, the first criteria, and not the second. Should it be? Why doesn't Mar give an example of what satisfies the second criteria and not the first? Give an example of something that is oil al shulchan malachim, but you can eat raw as well. The fact that the Gemara doesn't do that, they all want to say that the second opinion agrees with the first opinion, but it's just adding another kula, another leniency, which therefore in halacha, if either one, even if it cannot be eaten raw, if it's not oil shulchan malachim, we are lenient. We always take the lenient side over here. If you have salted fish, there's no bishul akum. What do you mean? If the salted fish, at this stage we're learning now, we don't know yet if a guy salted fish, what the status is. So if the fish is salted by Yid, which means it's already edible, and then a guy comes along and cooks it, there's no bishul akum, because as we just said, rule number one, if it's edible before the guy cooked it, the guy didn't really achieve much. It doesn't bring that kind of kinship that we're so concerned about. Rav Yisrael says, even though we say that it's not considered cooking, once something is edible when it's raw, and then you cook it, it's not considered cooking. But as far as eid of tafshilin is concerned, well, you have to put a cooked item, you have to, away, and you cook it before Yom Tov, whatever it is, and you put it away, you make an eid of tafshilin on it. If you take a salted fish and that was cooked, that's good enough. As far as eid of tafshilin is concerned, it's good enough. So what's the relevance if a goy cooked it? And he cooked it the same thing. It was edible when it was raw. So some Rishonim therefore omit it. Rashi leaves it in. So I'm thinking that the reason why Rashi leaves it in is a big chiddush. That the chiddush is at the same time that we say it's not cooked food, we're going to say it is cooked food. And that's a big, in other words, on the one hand, we're going to say this is not cooked food, you're allowed to eat it, this is not bishul akum, it's not considered cooked. At the same time, we're going to say, but you can use this food as a cooked item for eid of tavshilin. That's a much greater chiddush than if a yid happened to cook it. Here you have two mutually exclusive halachas taking place at the same time, side by side. Because we're saying it's not cooked food because it was edible while it was in a raw state. So you can go ahead and eat it. But it is cooked food, and therefore you can go ahead and prepare on Yom Tov to Shabbos because you put aside Erev Shul on this cooked food. Anyway, thinking about it further, the avdinu oivekachavim kosa the harsana. If the guy went ahead and he made kosa the harsana, which basically is when you fry the fats of fish with flour. What do you call it? Is also forbidden. Since you couldn't eat it raw, now you've cooked, so it's forbidden. It's bishul akum. Saying about pshita, isn't that obvious? No. I would have thought harasnika. The main thing here is the fish, and therefore, since the fish part of it you can eat raw, so therefore it should not be bishul akum. The main thing is the flour. The question is, when you eat food, what's the main thing of the food? The fact that it fills you up, or the flavor of the food? We all enjoy a tasty food, but what is the main purpose of that food? With Gemara first thought, we thought that the main purpose of the food is the flavor, and therefore, since the flavor is the main purpose, and you can eat it raw, there's no bishul akum. Kamashla, no. What fills you here is the flour, and the flour is not edible when it's raw. Therefore, there's bishul akum taking place. A goy hates his or agum lights a fire out there in the fields. Is cold. Now, what happens? He's trying to get rid of the grass, whatever it is, and to expose the land. And there's a bunch of grasshoppers there. Kol hachagovim sheba agam asuri. You're not allowed to eat any of the grasshoppers. And now that they're toasted and roasted, you're not allowed to eat it. Now, why not? Hey, what are you talking about? You just don't know which, now that it's all burnt, you have no idea whether there were the atomic, because you can't detect the sign, you can't discern the signs. You know, there's atomic trade. What's the relevance of going lit it? And I feel so now if I eat lit, it's the same problem. Elam should be surely over Gechavim. Must be because since the guy is the one who roasted it, and that's why you're not allowed to eat it because Bishalakum. Says the Gemara, the guy had no intention. In this case here, the guy had absolutely no intention to cook the grasshoppers. It just so happens to be that it cooked. But, and that's called Bishalakum. The Chorich Reisha. If a guy went ahead and singed the head of an animal, whatever it is, to eat from it. Right? He wanted to get rid of the hair of the animal. No intention of cooking anything else. He just focused on one particular part of the animal. You're allowed to eat even from the tip of the ear, which let's say you concentrate on the tip of the ear and the guy completely cook the tip of the ear. Nevertheless, you're allowed to eat it. Why? Why are you allowed to eat it? Because since the intent of the guy was not to cook the animal at all, the intent was to remove all the hair. And he wanted to remove the hair, and therefore it's not considered bishul. He had no intention here of cooking the grasshoppers. His intention was to get rid of the grass, and it happened to be there were a bunch of grasshoppers, and they got cooked up. So what's going on here? So you're right. It's talking about we don't know which is the kosher grasshopper, which is, and that's why you can't eat it. So you ask me a question, why talk about a goy, talk about a yid? You're right. But it had to be the guy doesn't want to look the fire. We're just telling you the story of what happened. Tosis learns from here an interesting halacha. Tosis says, it says here that if you did know, for example, if all the grasshoppers in that area were all tar, you can eat the grasshoppers now that they're roasted. Is a rai from here, you don't have to shecht grasshoppers. If you look in the order of the psukim, so you have, first thing is the animals you have to shecht. Then there's fowl. We're going to learn the Gemara Chulin that fowl, it's questionable whether even you have to shecht them, machlekes tanoim, because fowl is not really an animal, but it's better, it's more than fish, because they move around, so it's somewhere in between. Then you have fish. Fish, the Gemara says, has shchita, but when you take it out of the water, that is its shchita. And the next one is chagovim, which is, next one is the grasshoppers. You don't need anything. Anyway, the Gemara continues further. Gufa, let's analyze what you just said. A guy that came along and singed, let's say, the head to get rid of the hair, from the tip of the hair. Therefore, the shada sichsala tuna. If a guy threw in, let's say, a piece of wood into an oven to dry up, or a keli that was all wet and everything, and he wanted to dry it, the cover by Sokrami, and he happened to put in there some kind of a gourd from the melon family, put in there something in the oven was there before the guy came along. If the yid would have put something into the oven after the guy lit the fire, there's no problem with bishalakim at all, because the yid put the food in. The food was put in before the guy did it. The guy came along and put the fire on. So when the eat put in, there was no cooking, nothing. And the guy came along and made the whole cooking. So in this case over here, is there a problem of bishul akum or not? And based on what you just said right now, since the guy had no intention of cooking anything, he just wants to put a keli in there to dry up. Therefore, you're allowed to eat the gourd that came out. Shapid dummies. Is that obvious? No, it's not so obvious. I would have thought the bishul and the intention was his intention was to cook. Okay, to cook the pot, but his intention was to cook. And therefore, now that your thing got cooked, it's as if Bishul Akum knows. From here we learn out that a goy who had it turns out an oven, and you had food in there. You had no intention of cooking your food. You want to cook his own food. You're not allowed to eat your food because it's Bishul Akum. So we would have thought the same thing applies here. He had no intention of cooking his pot. He just wanted it to dry, and therefore that's not considered Bishul at all. And a lot of Shem have an argument where I just told you Pshat, that's Rashi, because in Masechta Shabbos we learned that this is considered cooking as far as the 39 malachas are. If you take a pot which is not solidified and you put it in the oven, it becomes dry and solidified, it is cooking. And I guess most of the to defend Rashi say that the laws of Shabbos operate very differently than here. So anyway, further, if a yid placed meat on top of coal, or by the guy came along and turned it over, it's permitted to eat. Now, in this case, he did everything. He put the food on the coal, and so on. And so what's the chiddush? What are we talking about? You would have cooked anyway, regardless. The guy didn't do anything. So what do you need to tell me that's kosher? You tell me what? If the guy wouldn't have tampered with it, nothing, but he wouldn't have cooked. No, so why takas are permitted? The guy did everything. So no, we needed it would have taken 2 hours to cook under the normal circumstances, the way they eat places. Now it cooks in 1 hour. So I would have thought I would have thought that this that the guy did by bringing it forward, that it's going to accelerate the cooking process, maybe it's considered as if it's bishul akum. Kamash malan, that it's not bishul akum. Since it would have cooked anyway, it's not really bishul akum. That's the chiddush here. Says the Gemara, that's how Rashi is. Says the Gemara, this is what you discussed a minute ago. Didn't Rabbi Asim Yechon, if it's a third ready, you have to wonder who these Ben Drusai people are, because these are Ganovim, and yet the Gemara keeps on talking about this family Ben Drusai. There must have been something good about them. We had them all over Masechta Shabbos as well. So these people who say that once it's a third ready, since somebody can eat it, Ain boy mishum bishalakim is no longer bishalakim. If a guy comes along afterwards and cooks it, remember we just said that if it's a raw, you can eat it, then the guy cooked it doesn't do anything. If it's edible, it's a third ready, it's edible, then the guy didn't achieve anything. You'll not eat it. So l'chayda seems to be so let's say it would have been less than ma'achal ben soy. Let's say it's been only a quarter way cooked or a fifth way cooked, and the guy comes along and accelerates the process. Sounds like it's a problem with bishalakim. Yes, but mishum bishalakim. What's going on here? Answers the Gemara Hassam over there. Going to oisve besilsa. They're talking about where you placed it in the basket. The guy took it off. We're not talking about our cases. The meat remained on the coal that the Yid placed it, and the guy just tampered with the coal, stoked the coal, and made it work quicker. And we're telling you that's not a problem. In this case over here, it's talking about where the guy took it off the fire and then put it back on. So if it's ready, a Michael Ben Drusoi, it's a third of the way cooked already, or some say a half Machlis Rashi and Rambam. Then when you took it off and you put it back on, it was already edible. So that's not really called bishul akum. If it was less than halfway cooked or less than a third of the way cooked, then you took it off and then you put it back on, then the guy cooked, which is a very different case than what we spoke about earlier. Tanya Nami, we actually learned the same thing. You can place, if a yid placed meat on top of coal, the boy will come happy, the guy came along and tossed it around. While the yid was in shul or in the base of Medrash, and he came back, they ain't not worried. So he comes back, but no, it's the guy. All the guy did was he made it faster. That's not a problem. He already put it on. The guy this proves our point that the guy accelerating the process does not cause a problem with bishul akum. Shoifes then the Bryce continues. Shoifes isha kedera agabekira. A woman can place a pot on the stove. Ubas a guy comes into the house, a maid or whatever. Umagisa and stirs the food. Achetova the comes back from the Beis Acheret, the Beis Merchetz, and the Beis HaKnesset from the Shul, the Ein Chesheshes. We're not worried about treif. We're talking about a case where, let's say, the guy couldn't go out and get some food. There's no access anywhere for treif. Otherwise, there's another problem. You leave the guy alone in the house. What about treif? Others say the fact that she doesn't know what time you're coming is enough to keep her in check. As a side issue, which I haven't seen anyone talk about, there's a I always ask the question to many Rabbanim, which I never got a satisfactory answer. My question always was, why is it that a Shulchan Aruch, which is supposed to cover all the halachas, and we have Hilchos Beis HaKnesses, the laws of what is a shul, where the Aron Kodesh should be, where the Bima should be, and where the Amud, everything is discussed, and the one glaring omission is a mechitza. There's no mention in Shulchan Aruch at all in Hilchos Beis HaKnesses about a mechitza. I always wondered why. Still wonder why. Never got into satisfaction. And the general answer everybody gives is women did not go to shul. So if you remember, we had the Gemara say to the Chafal, Rabbi Yechon asked this widow, there were 12 shuls in town, and she would walk all the way to the end of town to Rabbi Yechon's shul. And he asked her, what do you have to come to my shul for? You can go to another shul. So we see clearly women did go. But right here in the Gemara, this is even bigger. The Gemara says that that she went. Where did she go? To either a bathhouse or to a Beis HaKnesses, and this is a weekday. Not a Shabbat. You're not going to have a goy standing there lighting a fire on Shabbos and cooking. This is a weekday, and yet she went to shul. So women did go to shul, even during the week, and you have to wonder why it doesn't mention. But interesting, Rabbeinu Chananel here changes the word Beis HaKnesses and he puts in shuk, went to the marketplace. Maybe Rabbeinu Chananel felt that women didn't go to shul, but at least not during the week. So he took it out.
Don't you have we have the whole union of Tikkun Godlos Shloima that the women were in the Beis Hamikdash?
Yeah, but what's that do with davening?
To participate in Avodah Hashem.
No, that was dancing. That was Simcha Be'Sheva dancing. Totally different thing. In the Gemara, we had the Gemara in the Pei Aleph in Kedushin. The Gemara talks about a Rav and Abaya that they used to put pails of water, buckets of water, if you remember, and they made a mechitza with that, and therefore if somebody would cross over, they would hear the noise, and we have to stop them, or they would be embarrassed to go. So Rashi says there, what do you mean? When did they use a mechitza? There was an opportunity for Rashi to say when they went to daven. Rashi says no, by a drasha. The rabbi was giving a drasha. They had a mechitza. Not a word about davening. In Shulchan Aruch, in Siman, I think it's in Yudalad, where he talks about dinim of oil, or Shint as well, talk about the dinim of making a mechitza on Shabbos. And he gives an example in Shulchan Aruch. He's talking about now in the last 300 and 400 years, and Al Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, Mishabura, he gives an example of a shir in learning. Not davening. I don't know. Till today, I don't understand.
Well, which woman would want to miss out on a good drasha?
Oh, well, the men will walk out during the drasha. Exactly. A little kiddush. Yeah. Says the Gemara further. We ask a question. What happens if the goy what is the other way around? The goy put the food on the coal, and the yid turned over, placed the plate on the coal. Now, is that good enough? I'm not going to kal v'chomer. I have a kal v'chomer. If it completed in the hands of a goy, mutter. Sure, it's completed in the hands of a yid. Surely it is mutter. Whether the guy put it on the coal, the meat, and the eat, plays around with the fire. It's not forbidden unless the guy did everything. Omar Ravina said, continuing this theme, Hilchasa, the law is Harifta, this bread. The shogar, if a goy lit the fire, Yisrael, the Eid placed the bread on it and baked it. Or the other way around, shogar, Yisrael, the Eid lit the fire. And the goy baked, Inami, or shogar, the goy lit the fire, the goy baked it. All he did was, he didn't light the fire, he stoked the coal. Is good enough. Now Rashi says over here, what in the top line? Rashi says, what do you achieve by moving the coal around? So Rashi, second line on top, so Rashi learns that it's not enough that you just to stand there and throw a match in. You actually have to increase the fire. That's Rashi Shita. And in fact, almost all the Rishonim hold that. The Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rambam paskins that if you throw a match in, it's good enough. Even though throwing a match in, it absolutely does not add anything to the cooking process, because the Rambam, the way the Mefarshim of the Rambam is, the whole idea is a reminder to you that remember that you don't want to interact with the guy and so on. And throwing in a match, telling you the halachas that you're throwing a match, that's good enough to be a reminder. The Machlekes Rishonim, if that only applies to Pas Akum or also to Bishul Akum, because this Gemara here, L'chayda, is talking about Bishul. Yet most of Shem hold that this applies more to Pasakum than to Bishulakum. And Tosha says something very interesting. Tosha says over here that how come that our Gemara here seems to be saying that you have to make a fire that increases the fire, and yet our minig is we just throw in a match or a piece of wood and that's good enough. So Tosha says this is a difference between Bnei Bavel and Bnei Eretz Yisrael. That Bnei Eretz Yisrael are machmer, these dinim here coming from Eretz Yisrael, even though it's Amoraim from Bavel, but they're talking about Eretz Yisrael who are machmer. But we in Bavel, the Amoraim of Bavel felt you can throw in a match, and we always follow Bavel against as opposed to Eretz Yisrael. So I think about it further. We have another machlekes, dog meliach. What about salting a fish? If a guy went ahead and made schmaltz herring or salted a fish or something, are you allowed to eat it or not? Because now, before it was not edible, now it is edible. Chizki says, yes, you're allowed to. Why are you allowed to? Because it's not called cooking. And we always usher is cooking through fire, and this is not that. And Rabbi Yochanan says usher. Rabbi Yochanan says the fact is the guy prepared it. Without him, you couldn't eat it, so it's usher. That's number one machlekes. Next one is beyat sluya, a roasted egg. Is Bakapota says shari is permitted. A hard-boiled egg is permitted. Why? He says because you have a shell around it, so really the food itself does not come in contact at all with what's going on with the cooking, even though it's being affected by it, but there's no direct contact. And Rabbi Yechon says asur. It's asur because it's affecting it, and therefore it's asur. The way I just told you about Rashi learns, which would seem then that this that we say it's mutter is only a hard-boiled egg, but a fried egg, a scrambled egg, sunny side up, and all that would be asur. Other Rishonim hold that according to Chizkiah, any egg is permitted, and different reason altogether. Since you can eat a raw egg, maybe it's not the most tasty thing, but you can eat a raw egg. So therefore, if a guy cooks it, you're allowed, there's no bishul akum. And according to them, you can have a fried egg from a guy as well. There's no bishul akum. But Rashi learns that no, it's only a hard-boiled egg. Says about it further, Rapidu came along, he repeated the same thing, but he just put them together. It wasn't two different arguments, it was the same time they argued that a fish that was salted or an egg that was roasted, permitted. Rabchia Parva, the more tells a story here, which is difficult to understand. Equal the Beit Galusa. Rabchia Parva once happened to be in the house of the chief exilach, the head of Babel. Amrulay, they said to him, tell us, Beyat Saluya, roasted egg, Mai, can we eat from a goy or not? Amru Chizkiah, he said, well, you have Chizkiah and Bakapara, you have two Tanoim here. Sharu, they permitted, and Rabbi Yochanan asses, and we know that the ain the word of Shal Echad b'Makom Shnayim. Rabbi Yochanan is one, Bakapara and Chizkiah are two, and therefore 1 against 2, he doesn't win. Only Rabbi Zvi said 1 second. He turned around to the people there in the house and he said to them, Loita Tzisulei, don't listen to what Abchia is telling you. Hachi Amar Abaye. Hilchsa Kavasi Rabbi Yochanan. Abaye holds Allah is like Rabbi Yochanan. And in fact, the big machlekes of Shainim, we follow what Abaye said, and if we do, only which cases. Anyway, they got so upset. Ashkiyua Niguta de Chol. They gave him to drink some kind of a vinegar. The Noch Nafshe and Zvid passed away. Very difficult to understand. So just killed him on the spot. For what? So it's a hard one to fathom what actually happened here. How do they get away with it, and why would they kill the guy? And this is Abzvida made it. This is how he passed away, because he made a psak they didn't like. It's dangerous to be a rabbi these days. Anyway, there's the Gemara further. Just 1 second, please.
Okay. Be careful who gave you that.
I do it myself. I make sure that's on Ashgacha.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, my throat is a bit parched. Okay. Talabana, and we learned Hakaprise, these are the shells of capers, Haka plutas, and leek. So these are all things that are edible when they're raw. The Hametalia, which Morrison tells what that is, the Chamin and hot water, which again, you can eat it when it's raw. The Hakloya is interesting. Rashi said by Chamin, instead of saying you can drink water when it's cold and raw in its raw state, Rashi says that the fire, you haven't changed their form with the fire. But it doesn't matter. And if you did, remember we just said before that if it was edible in a raw state, then it's permitted because the guy is not really achieving much. So I'm not sure why Rashi has to say that you didn't really change, the fire doesn't change the state of the water at all. Anyway, the hakloyis and the dry toasted wheat, shalahen, they're all mutar, they're permitted. But beyat sluya asur, but a roasted egg is asur, which is different than bakapora and chishkim. It's not a problem because they're tanoim, they can argue. Shemen, what about oil? You don't know, we learned a few days ago, nimno alav vitro, they permitted the oil of a goy. Tanya, we learned, he ha-metalia, what's this metalia? Metalia, you should know, is the exact same thing as peshalia. And if that helps you, if it doesn't help you, then you should know he shiasa. It's the same thing as shiasa. So everybody wants to know what's shiasa. What kind of mixture is that? It's something that's edible in its raw state. What is it? 40 years ago, this happened in Mitzrayim. But Rabbi Bar Chana, the day Rabbi Chana says Hoshizin was 60 years. They're not going to say, but they're not arguing. This guy, Rabbi Yecha, was older than Rabbi Chana, so he's saying it happened 40 years ago, and Rabbi Chana was saying it happened, 60 years ago. We're talking about the years. Maise, what happened was, this is what they used to do. Maise, they would bring bizra, seeds of the karpas, so seeds of karpas, which is celery usually, or parsley. Ubizra, the kisna, and seeds from flax. Ubizra, and seeds of the shavlisa, of fenugreek. The total bahadi adodi bipshur, they would just soak it together in warm water. The shavkal, they would leave it at the makabel until it sort of take root and they start growing. It would start suddenly blooming and blossoming. Umaisi chatzchad, bring a brand new keli, umol with water, v'torabo gagisha, to put a little bit of dirt in there, of clay. Umedapkin bay, and they would take these seeds and attach it to the walls. They would bring it into the bathhouse. Adenofko, at the time they got out of the bathhouse, malavloi, it would go ahead and by the time they got out of the bathhouse, already full bloom. But they would eat it for therapeutic reasons. That is, so hot, this would cool them down from the hairs on the head until the very bottom of the feet. So this is the mixture that we said before. It could have been eaten raw state as well, and that's why if a guy makes this mixture, it's permitted. Chanina said this is Baba Mises. Interesting way. It's just hyperbole, talk. Because it's possible to grow so quickly. And we always talk about shkedim that grows the fastest. But not, it's impossible, so 21 days. It's impossible to grow so fast. But others say, Ben Milan, it must have been used of some kind of a chant. This is some kind of a kishuf, witchcraft. Somebody learned. Hakuspin, the left or the remnants of dates that they make beer with, and you heat it up. Right, so this thing was cooked up. If the guy used a large pot, also, it's also. So this is not a question of bishul akum. This is a question of maybe some treif went into there. It'd be yoyed tana, but if you use a small pot, mutter is permitted. The easy tana. How do you define a yoyed tana? We're not choishes for treif anymore. What's the definition of a small pot? I want to be on a kosher. Ain't tipadro yochel chomet. A certain kind of a bird cannot fit inside. It's a small, tiny bird. And if it cannot fit inside, there's nothing treif in there. So what do you mean? Maybe cut it up. The head of this tipadroid is so tiny, so minute, that if that cannot fit in, it's such a narrow neck that cannot fit in, then there's no shash of treif. Tanya, we learned elsewhere, whether it was a large pot, is also permitted. Like kasha. It's not a question, because this follows the opinion that if there's a foul taste after overnight or over 24 hours, different opinions. And if you hold that it's usher, so then in a goyish pot, it is usher if a bird can fly in. In other words, it could be used for treif. And in other words, as Taisus explains in the Shining, we generally assume that pots are not ben yoimos, that that a general pot that's being used has not been used for 24 hours. That's an assumption we always make. Number one. And number two is if something is not a bnei yoimim, then the tam that comes out perhaps is livgam. In other words, it's not as fresh and it could actually be ruining the food. And the question is something treif. It's already treif, but it's not really contributing in a positive way. Is that still a problem or not? Nois and tam livgam is usher, it's still treif, it's forbidden, or nois and tam livgam is mutter. And that's the two opinions here. Omer of Sheishes, Hi, Mishcha Shlika Damoi. This cooked oil from this people from Amoi also forbidden. Why is it forbidden? Only their oil. What exactly are we worried about? Are we worried about they maybe mix some wine in it? Sorry, Mr. Sorry, if they put wine in there, it would ruin the oil. Why would they do that? We already had this concept before. There has to be a logic to it, why they would put wine in there. If it doesn't improve it, why would they do it? Now, what exactly do you mean when the Gemara said that oil can be eaten when it's raw? It probably means that you could dip your challah in the oil, and that's edible, so therefore that's considered as if eating the oil into raw. Even though you cannot eat oil, and so in fact we had the Gemara in brachas whether you make a bracha on it because it's mazik, but I guess if you dip your challah in it, that's considered eating it raw. So what's the bishalakum? And if you worry about kashering, nois and tam gamu mutter. So from here, the Rishonim bring a proof that the halacha is that Nois and Tam Gam is mutter, because the Gemara says it with such confidence and certainty. It's Nois Tam Gam should be mutter. So what's the problem? Says the Gemara further. They asked Rav Asi a question. Hani ahini, these dates shalik they'll cook them. What's the halacha? If they cook these dates, can you eat it or not? So he says, what's the problem? If let's say the dates are very, very sweet, and the only way to eat it really because it's so sweet is that so if it's sweet and therefore it was able to be eaten when it's raw, we just learned before there's no bishalakum, no problem for going to cook something that is edible when it's raw. So what's sorry. If it's sweet, the badeshar is permitted because you could eat it raw. Meridi, if it's impossible to eat because it's bitter, then like to boil the badeshar, it's also if it's not edible, it was inedible, and now you prepared it. The guy prepared the cooking. What's the chashayla? Keep the boilach would say sort of in the between. You could eat it raw, but it's not that geschmack. You can force yourself. He's mine. Amalhu, he said to the Mai Tabaylahu, the Rebbe, your Rebbe also actually forbade it. Who is your Rebbe? Mana, who is that? Levi. So therefore it's forbidden because it's not really edible when it's raw, only if you force yourself. That's not called edible. Says the Shesisa, some cooked item that's made out of toasted wheat in the oven, and then sometimes you use the flour from lentils, and they're very, very sweet, so you put some vinegar in the mixture. Shesisa, Rab permitted it. He permitted it. As we'll soon see why, because you can eat it when it's raw. Avodah Shmuel and the father of Shmuel and Levi, they forbid it. So now the Gemara explains. Bechiti, oisaidi, when it comes to wheat or it comes to barley, there's no problem to show you permit because nobody puts vinegar in there. No problem. So what's the problem there? It's edible when it's a raw state, toasted wheat, and it's edible now in the mixture, so no problem. So you're not worried about vinegar. We talk about the lentils, the challah, kuliyam lepli, those are forbidden. That is that forbidden because definitely mixed in some of this wine vinegar and it's forbidden. So what is it? Not when there's put vinegar in there. We're talking about lentils with water. So what's the problem? If it's cooked lentils, and let's say lentils that you can eat raw and cooked with water, what's the problem? If we allow you to eat the lentils mixed with the water, next time you can eat the lentils with the vinegar. So this is sort of a gzeira. It's a gzeira. So the Gemara. Another version is we're going even a step further. When it comes to water, everyone will be forbidden because the gzeira that you next time with vinegar. Wheat and barley. It's 2 steps away. First of all, the wheat and barley, and then we say next. If we allow that next time, and next time you're going to use lentils, and then water lentils, and then if you use water lentils, next time you might use you might eat the lentils with the vinegar, the wine vinegar by a guy. You won't even think about it. So that's the machlek. It's 2 steps away. Rav says Rav, shtei mine shisa. There's 2 kinds of shisa, shada barzila with the vinegar and with the water. Barzila hagilot he sent to David HaMelech 2 kinds of water, and they were hungry. Whatever it is, he sent them food. And it says in the pasuk, he sent them mishka v'safos. He sent them, bed gear. He sent them safais, all kinds of plates and bowls, or clay yotzin, and all kinds of pots. The chitim l'sa'odim, wheat and barley. The kemach and flour, and the koli and the dried wheat. And then it says pasuk poil, beans, ba'adoshim and lentils. The koli, it says again, and dried beans. Why twice says koli? Must be given 2 kinds of mixtures there, 2 kinds. Says the Gemara. But now today nobody follows the Gzeda. They go ahead and they actually give out. They sell pieces of it. They sell they sell all these little pieces. Nobody's really concerned about what Avodah Shmuel and Levi is about all these Gzedas. Nobody's worried about the Gzedas. The next part of the Mishnah is a kvoshin. Kvashim are things which are marinated or you preserve, and it was quite common they would use wine as a preservative for marinating. So that's forbidden. Amar Chizkiah said, "Lo yishanu ela shedarkam." It's not talking about only that you don't know is the wine put in there, is no wine put in there. So we're machmer. Because the Mishnah said these are usher in eating, but it's not usher bahano. Why isn't it forbidden to have an alcohol? We don't know if there's actually any wine in there. So therefore it's only usher ba'achila. However, obviously you do it, but if you know for a fact that there's wine vinegar in there, then usher is forbidden to fill bahano. It's like yain nesach. Very much why you're telling me that if we know for a fact that there's wine there, it's not only usher ba'achila, but no. So how is this different than what we learned a while ago by Murius, where they mixed wine into this mixture there? The Shara Rabbanamano, they allowed you to have ano. And we said that then that because it's not so obvious it's in there, it's not really ben. What's the difference between Murius and Kavushin? So the Gemara Hassam there by Murius, what's the role of the wine? It's very fatty fish there. What's the role of the wine? La Vure Zoima, because they have such fatty fish. The wine there is basically to remove or to diminish the bad things, the spoiled things in there. It's not there really to contribute a positive way. It's actually there to get rid of the bad qualities that was in there. However, over here, limit 2K timer. Here, the reason why in the kosher, when you want to marinate and preserve it, you actually want the flavor of the wine to be in there, and therefore it's also. But Rabbi Yechanan goes a step further. He says, "I feel me do nami mutter." He holds it's taka mutter, but he holds that it's only also even if you know for sure that there's wine there, it's no different than Murius. So the Gemara, if it's no different than Murius, by Murius we had an argument in the previous Mishnah where Rameya said you not have a no. So how come Rameya doesn't argue in the case of Kushin? Well, Maishlam and Murius Rameya is also by no. So we answer Hassam over there, Yediyah Mamosha. Over there, in the case of Murius, you actually can feel because you dip in it and you can feel the wine. Over here, when you preserve it, you don't really eat the preservatives, you eat the final product. So therefore, the wine really is not part of the food. And that's why Rameir doesn't argue it's only us.